Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining for today's session. Before we start, we'll ask you to introduce yourself in the chat section on the right of your screen in one sentence. Hello, Kathrin. Welcome.
Hi, sorry, I'm back.
So we are live, Kathrin, compared to a few minutes before. I was asking to the audience to introduce yourself in the chat section. We are many people today live, so that's great. And to specify what you are expecting from this session, so we are sure to cover what you're coming here for. So thanks for being here, Marguerite and Kathrin, to share on this topic today on opportunities and challenges for FemTech. I will just make Maud join on stage 1 second,
Sure.
So that I need to find you, Maud, in the participants. Where are you? Maybe she's not connected yet. Okay, I'll do that once Maud is connected. Oh, yes, you're here, Maud. Okay, that helps. Thank you. Invite on stage. Okay, so Maud is part of Sista's team also. So what we'll cover today, first we'll introduce Sista very quick so that you know hello Maud, what we do for this association. And then we'll just come back on how wide FemTech is, and so that we are sure you are on the same page. And then we'll dig into today's topic with the challenges and the opportunities for FemTech with Kathrin and Marguerite. Just for a quick start, so Sista is an association based in France, but with a European vision. The objective is to support women who are leading companies and to help them get some funding as well for their companies. Originally, it was only focused on this funding part, and now we are expanding on different topics, including FemTech, and that's why we launched this initiative within Sista. Maud, you want to follow up with
Sure.
the FemTech covers?
Hi, everyone, and hi to the speakers. So yeah, just wanted to set the stage. I'm assuming a lot of you know what FemTech is, but there was actually an official definition of FemTech that was coined by Ida Tin, who's the founder of Quelles. So Quelles is a period tracking app and probably one of the first products and consumer products to have gone mainstream in what we call FemTech. So she described FemTech as the software, diagnostics, products and services that use technology to support women's health. And so, there's a few categories within FemTech that we consider. And the innovations are around all of these categories. First category is menstruation and period care products. Second category is fertility and birth control. Third category is menopause. Another one is chronic conditions and hormonal disorders, pelvic health, pregnancy and post-pregnancy, breastfeeding, sexual wellness, and general health care. So these are all the categories. I think it's also good to set the stage for what's the kind of market of FemTech. So the market size was valued at close to $19 billion in 2019. And the big number is that it's expected to reach 60 billion by 2027. Also, so that's the size of the market. As far as funding, what's really interesting is, you'll see the total investments in 2019 in the FemTech vertical, where we've seen there's many sub-verticals within FemTech, was 1.69 billion. And in Europe, it's super tiny. It was 190 million in 2019. So in Europe in particular, we still have a long way to go. And then I wanted to finish by some stats. I think all of us around this table are very well aware of these stats, and this is where we see and we're excited about the opportunity. But 90% of women are primary decision makers for their family. and when it comes to healthcare. So it's important to kind of address women because they're decision makers in healthcare overall. But I think what's most important is that we realize that there's only 1.4% of capital of healthcare capital that goes into femtech only, and this is where we see the big opportunity. And then historically, that despite representing an economic and a market of 500 billion, only 4% of healthcare research and development funding is targeted towards women's health. So I think, from all of the parts of the ecosystem, which is what are the problems that we're solving, how much money are we putting on the problem, how we're financing it, and how we allowing to tackle these problems. There's a lot of things to do in health in femtech. So yeah, that's it for a brief introduction of femtech. So I'll leave it to you guys for the rest of the session.
Thanks, Maud. So I suggest we start by introducing yourself, Kathrin and Marguerite. What you're doing, why you're here today, what's your relation with femtech, and how did you end up in that space? Kathrin, you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and also for this initiative coming from sisters, specifically targeting femtech. I'm Austrian originally. I'm also part of the current femtech cohort at Station F with my company PERLA Health. But yeah, how did I get into femtech? I'll just start with the story. So my background is really in tech. I've spent my entire career working for tech companies of all different shapes and sizes, from very, very big corporates to very small startups, and also scale-ups across Europe and the US. And I was diagnosed with PCOS, so polycystic ovary syndrome, which is a chronic condition that affects around 1 in 10 women a couple of years ago. And so for me, the diagnosis really came out of nowhere. And, the shocking bit for me was I'd always thought I'm like a person, I know about health, I know how to stay healthy, eat well, or work out. That's what women's health is. And then here I was in my early 30s being diagnosed with something I had never, ever heard about. And so, first I obviously had to learn about PCOS and how to manage my own, newly discovered chronic condition after having struggled with the symptoms pretty much my entire adult life. And so I, had to figure out how to live with PCOS. And then I discovered the whole world of women's health and just understood that there's so much more to this than what I initially thought, this whole, working out and eating well, and that's how you're going to stay healthy bit. And yeah, I, got very, very into women's health and sort of learned a lot about it. And because of my background in tech, when you've spent that much time in the tech space, then you look at a problem and you're always like, how can I solve this through innovation or through tech? And so I discovered the world of femtech, and quite early on. So you already mentioned Clue, and sort of that story. And I started to make a list of companies that were active in this space for no reason whatsoever except my own personal interest. And then I think it was beginning of 2019 when the infamous Frost & Sullivan report with the 50 billion by 2025 number of the femtech space sort of sizing came out. And that was when femtech got a little bit of traction, a little bit of press. And I was very excited because I was like, look, this space I've been following for a while is, finally getting attention by VCs, by press. Sort of there's a little bit more talk around it. And I was like, well, where can I go and learn more now? And so at the time, there wasn't really a place. And so I decided to create one. And so I'm the founder and CEO of a platform called Femtech Insider. And we're sort of really known for a weekly newsletter that we do. And also have recently launched a report subscription service where we kind of explore different areas of women's health. And so I've been doing this for around 2-ish years now. And on that journey, I also met Janine, my co-founder now at PERLA Health, a startup in the femtech space. And we're a startup that's hoping to make a difference for women with PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, like myself. And we're very, very early stage and excited to be part of the first femtech cohort at Station F. And that's kind of my relation to femtech. That was a lot of words, so yeah, I hope that was...
Thanks, Kathrin. Marguerite?
Cool. Tough to follow after that, Kathrin. No, but I'm Marguerite. So I'm French, as you can tell by my accent, but I've lived in different places in Europe, and I'm actually here providing more the kind of like investor perspective. And I discovered the FemTech world when I joined the VC world, which was now 3 years ago. So very brief background. I went to the UK for my studies, and then I ended up staying there for 9 years in total. And I've always worked in tech. So I started by being a consultant specialized in digital transformation strategies and open innovation programs. So basically back then I was helping the big corporates work with startups and try to become more aware of what were the trends disrupting the industries. And back then I was actually working a lot with Unilever, obviously like also doing a lot of feminine products. And I also worked with L'Oreal. So I kind of like started looking at the feminine space, generally speaking, but not particularly with a strong tech angle. But still, when mapping the space and educating the CEOs of those companies, I was basically discovering a lot of startups, including startups in the FemTech world. And then I was in operations for a while. So I basically joined a French startup called Side. And after that, I moved to Berlin, where I ended up spending 2 years before going back to Paris. And yeah, I moved to Berlin to join a it's basically a multi-stage fund. Back then, I was mostly looking at Series A and B rounds, whereas today at Cherry Ventures, I look mostly at seed rounds. And there also, I started doing deep dives on FemTech because Natural Cycles is one of the portfolio companies of eVentures, in which eVentures invested at Series A stage. So obviously we really witnessed firsthand the kind of challenges that they had, but we also spotted that as a very, like, I think Natural Cycle and Clue were clearly the two first pioneers, at least in the European market, educating a bit investors and like on the FemTech opportunities and how big the market opportunities actually are. So that was super interesting, and that's when I started really loving that space. So I joined Cherry in September 2018 and 19, sorry. And since then I've been doing a deep dive on the FemTech space, and I think it's a space that's really fascinating because I think for many generations, there were really strong taboos on specific questions. And basically, I think the technology also enables to put some light on dark spots that we wouldn't have identified otherwise. And I think tech is slowly taking major steps to balance out gender disparities. And so that's leading to more kind of like female-centric health technology companies. And I think we also realize much more how technology can help empower and educate women, and also make you aware of specific things by creating a community around those. So I feel super strongly about it. And I think initiatives like yours, Kathrin, with the weekly newsletter and stuff, are doing a huge job in helping us understand the space better and the opportunities associated with that. And you've got a lot of very interesting newsletters. For me, the first one was Fem Street. So yeah, I think there's still a lot to be done, but I think we saw really promising signs in the space recently.
I have a quick question, Megan. Can you tell us a little bit more about Cherry Ventures and also maybe some of the investments you've done in the space? Did you hear me okay?
No, sorry, my connection dropped out. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could introduce Cherry Ventures to the audience and maybe what.
Of course, sorry.
Space. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, especially I saw that there are a few also female founders also in the audience. So we would love to see your companies. But we're basically a seed stage fund. We invest everywhere across Europe. We are currently investing out of our third fund, which is 175 million euros in size. And we're halfway through the investment period, so we still have at least like 12, 15 investments to do out of that fund. We position ourselves as having a strong operational DNA, and that's because everyone in the investment team has either an entrepreneurial experience or an operational experience. I'm a bit of an exception because I come from another fund, but all the others have a much more impressive entrepreneurial journey. And the fund was actually founded in 2015 by Philip and Christian, who were amongst the first employees at Zalando and stayed through to the IPO. We always had a very strong consumer DNA also because of that. We also recently welcomed Sophia Benz as a partner in the firm in September last year. Sophia was one of the first 8 employees at Spotify, ended up staying there for 8 years as their global head of marketing. So again, very strong on consumer topics. And yeah, I guess our average ticket size is between 1 and 3 million euros. We tend to take a lead position or a co-lead position. We just don't do follower tickets just because we do not so many deals a year. We do around 10 deals a year, which is relatively low for a stage fund. But it's important for us to stick to that because when we invest, you have the full commitment and the full conviction from everyone in the investment team. And we really want to keep it that way because we consider ourselves to be really hands-on. And that's why we also have an operational team in place to help the investment team. So it's 11 of us in the investment team, and we have 5 people helping on communication, PR, finance, and hiring across Europe. And I'm personally based in Paris in non-COVID times. So I spend a lot of time looking after the French market, but not exclusively. And we have portfolio companies really everywhere across Europe. So that's for Cherry.
Thanks, Marguerite. So let's dive into the questions that the audience asked before the event. So thanks for sharing all the questions ahead. We gathered the main questions that were the most common among all the questions. But feel free to ask questions on the go in the question section on the right, and we'll answer them as well. So first, a few questions about really getting started in FemTech and how do you finance FemTech also. So it's interesting to have both of your opinion because Marguerite, you have really the founding side, and Kathrin, you are more operational on the entrepreneurial operational side. So that would be very complementary. In your experience with all the FemTech companies that you saw or supported, what does success look like for FemTech startups, and what are the factors that someone that want to launch a FemTech should look at? Wants to start?
Yeah, I mean, I can share my thoughts sort of also how we're thinking about this at PERLA. I think what really success looks like. So I think in the FemTech space, first of all, we have a lot of founders that are female founders and that generally, really trying to solve their own problems. And, that are often maybe from non-traditional backgrounds, not VC, not finance, potentially not healthcare. It's really just like patients like me that are like, well, there's a problem and I really want to do something about it. I'm going to be very honest, I would be completely lost if I didn't have my co-founder who has a digital health background, a digital health VC background specifically. But I think, there's a lot that, just like women like myself that are seeing a problem, attempting to solve it, just, don't know about this world of like startups and sort of ecosystems. In terms of what success looks like, I think we unfortunately sometimes misinterpret success, first of all, with raising a big round. And, there's a lot of amazing bootstrap companies that actually get quite far simply, with pre-seed or angel rounds or, very, very sort of small investment. In terms of success factors that we're looking at, on the one hand, it's really solving the patient's problem or, the woman's problem that we're seeing. So really kind of the patient impact. And, we're talking a lot about value-based care. And so, really only paying based on the results that these digital therapeutics and digital solutions are bringing to the table. On the other hand, one thing that I think is also very important is health economics. So in terms of, are we really sort of making a difference in terms of bringing cost savings into the health system? We see, I think, in Europe specifically that a lot of us founders are quite conscious about access. So, it's kind of, you often have to start direct to consumer and then sort of, go down, collect some evidence, and then eventually go down that road of trying to, be reimbursed, become a digital therapeutic. So we're a UK company. We're obviously looking very closely at the NHS. I know DIGA in Germany is quite interesting. There's some interesting developments happening also in Italy, and from what I've gathered, also France, with regards to, helping digital health startups to get their solutions reimbursed. And that was, again, a lot of words, but essentially I think the two things is really sort of, are we making a difference for the patients that we're trying to serve? And are we really making a difference in terms of health economics and bringing savings to the systems that we're trying to be a part of?
Okay, thanks. Margaret, what are your thoughts?
So I guess to comment on that, maybe from an investor perspective. So I think the point on bringing value to the consumer is absolutely fundamental. Also because very often, not always, but very often, I mean, if you look at sexual wellness or specific, fertility tracking, you might not always be aware that there is an opportunity there. So you really need to bring value to the user right away, because there is some kind of like educative part in selling that product, because if you're not like replacing something that's existent in most cases because of the nascent aspect of the market, and so because you would be the first product that women use for a specific thing, then you really need to get it right from the beginning. And I think that's really core. So really having a very clear user journey and value add to the consumer from day one and have a frictionless experience is really core for those products. I think the innovation from a scientific perspective or from a data perspective needs to be very clear as well, just because you tend to deal with sensitive information, data, content, or whatever it is. Like if it's to maybe check your level of fertility, then obviously if you're going to tell a user that like she might have issues having a kid, you need to make sure that the information is incredibly robust and backed by proper scientific knowledge or processes. You also need to make sure that you are incredibly careful with the way you manage that data, and that you are incredibly careful with the way you deliver that information. And the same goes with like maybe less scientific products like sexual wellness, because it is sensitive content. And for instance, for us as a fund, our LPs, so the investors that have put money in our fund and we are basically deploying their money into the companies, our LPs are going to be very careful with that, because it can have a negative connotation. So if you're a company in the sexual wellness space, basically, how do you make sure you don't fall into the porn category? How do you make sure that your content is going to be regulated in the right way on your platform? How do you give the right moderation amongst the users? Those are questions we're going to be very careful on. And then I would say lastly, maybe something that we look at is also the founding team. We have looked at companies that were co-founded by male founders, but where it was only males in the founding team. And to be honest, that was also a bit of a blocker for us, not because we are negatively discriminating in that sense, but just because you could tell that some very specific questions that we had, especially at Cherry now, we are 4 investors in the team. So the team got grilled by 4 women, and you could tell that basically you kind of need to understand the problem to be able to solve it in the right way. So it's true that if you're tackling a very feminine issue, you need to make sure that you have women, but also as part of the founding team and as part of the executive in your startups, not just at more junior levels. So I think those would be the key things.
Okay, and on the other side, because you're mentioning the parity necessity within the fund, but I mean within the startup that is launching a femtech, what we hear often from a femtech startup is that it's difficult to raise funds, also because, as you say, all the investors don't necessarily know the issue they are tackling. because because of course if they are men they cannot experience it. So it's more it's an additional challenge for those entrepreneurs.
Yep.
Focusing on this funding aspect, what challenge do you see for entrepreneurs to raise funds? What are the best practices you would share for young entrepreneurs tackling femtech issues to have the best chance to make their round? So that's more for Marguerite, I guess.
Yeah. No, I mean, your point is completely true. And I think that's also a huge reason why femtech took so long to come up and become kind of like trendy to the eyes of the investors. It's also because the VC industry has been and still is heavily male dominated. And so obviously you're going to pitch to men a problem that they don't understand, that they don't experience. And so they can't really associate it with an interesting market opportunity because it's not a market that they even envisioned. So I think that's why it's very, very important as investors, as funds, as founders, like it's very important that the different stakeholders in the tech ecosystem really help improve the diversity in the ecosystem. I think we're going in the right direction. We're absolutely not there yet. But I think that's really something that should be close to any fund. It's really like, how do you, like for instance, at Cherry, we have just a few months ago, we put in place a diversity and inclusion task force. We meet twice, on a bi-weekly basis, and to just understand how we can do better and how we can be more exposed also to female founder and how we can be more attractive to female founder and how we can increase the amount of female founders on our deal flow at the top of the funnel, but also later on in the conversion cycle when we start doing deep dives on companies and then bringing them to final meeting and then ending up investing in them. So I think that's the first point. I would heavily recommend any female founder or femtech founder to rely on networks like Sista, like your network, Kathrin, or like really, I think now we are seeing a proliferation of initiatives in Europe. Also because we understand, just like climate change, we understand that diversity is a huge problem in the industry, that it is not at the level where it should be, and that this needs to change. And I think now we've moved beyond just the PR initiative. I think maybe a couple of years ago, that was a bit of a PR move, wanting to be a bit more like the US, because the US are a bit ahead of us in that sense. But I think now, funds are really realizing that they are missing incredible investment opportunities because of that. Because obviously a very good female founder having a very good idea is not really going to be attractive to work with a fully white male dominated partnership. And so I think we are seeing a proliferation of initiatives there that is being really helpful. I think also Station F and other institutions or fund themselves are also putting in place women office hours. So those would be kind of like, for instance, 2 hours in a week led by investors. We actually better put that as well at Cherry, where it would be really time dedicated for female founder to approach us, to cold email us or do a cold reach out to us and make sure that they get FaceTime in front of us, not just an email that is going to get lost in 100 other emails. So yeah, and I think, I think Twitter is actually a good tool for that, just because those initiatives can surface a bit more in the Twitter ecosystem. And I think, I think the VC ecosystem is quite present on Twitter. And I think VCs and Sista and stuff are being very vocal on those platforms. So I think really don't hesitate to follow those initiatives. And also I would say don't hesitate to cold reach out to women founders or women investors. I think we're always going to be open for chat and to help on specific questions or issues you might be facing.
Okay, and when the entrepreneurs in femtech are facing funds that are mainly led by men, what do you have concrete tips for those entrepreneurs to be more convincing when you are tackling a topic that is not so well known? Do you have because it's not only the case for femtech, it's the case for any industry that is new and that is growing. Do you have concrete tips for entrepreneurs for that?
So I'm really sorry. Can you repeat the question because the line broke?
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
I'm repeating the problem.
Oh, I don't know if it was one for Kathrin.
No, it was for you, Marguerite. Just to complete on what you were saying, do you have concrete tips for entrepreneurs in femtech to be more convincing when they are talking to VCs that don't know femtech so much, but whatever the reason why, to be more convincing on a market that is relatively new?
Yeah. I think we're seeing the numbers improving a lot. As Maud said, the market is estimated to reach 60 billion by 2027. So I think just making sure that for some opportunities, like, I don't know, if a company today is raising for a productivity tool in their remote work setup, obviously they're going to be, it's going to be less hard for them to make them understand that it's a good opportunity because we are just living it right now. But I think if you make sure that in your deck or in your small blurb that you're going to send via email, you highlight the market opportunities, then that would be always helpful. Because, I mean, if you look, PitchBook released a very interesting report recently. There has been 9 exits in 2020, 9 femtech that exited. So I think we're seeing more and more examples. So if you use those numbers and the name of those companies in your pitch and just like to highlight how there is a real business opportunity there, I think that would always be helpful. And typically I would tell you, don't necessarily spend too much explaining the market opportunity. I think for femtech it is interesting because you never know who's going to end up reading your deck, and it might be a guy who doesn't really get it. So don't hesitate to say, like, usually we would recommend doing only 1 slide on market. I think for femtech you can very easily do more than that, just to make sure that there is a good understanding of your product.
Okay, thanks for yeah. But you are okay. You're blocked. Okay, I will follow up. So in your opinion, Kathrin, on the entrepreneurial side point of view, what challenge do you see for femtech entrepreneurs regarding funding, especially?
Yeah, I mean, I can really just follow on to what Marguerite was saying. I think there's a big challenge sort of on the educational side. I think that's also where we're trying to make a bit of a difference with what we do at Femtech Insider. But I think, it starts somewhere else. Like, all these women's health conditions have been stigmatized for so long. Like, even us as women, sometimes we don't necessarily know enough about these conditions. So there's not a lot of public discourse about these issues because we don't talk about it. So, if nobody talks about it, is it really that big of a deal? So, you start to wonder, right? And then, like, it trickles down. Like, there's not a lot of research done. So, we're sometimes struggling to really make these business cases because, we need to, again, sort of make a point of like, okay, this is how I'm making a difference for patients. This is how I'm going to measure my impact, like on the patient, but also on the healthcare system that I'm a part of. And then, with market numbers, like I can tell you with PCOS in our pitch deck, the market sizing numbers are like based on studies from 2009. And like, since then, we know healthcare got a lot more expensive. So it's probably twice that. And that's not because we're not trying to do a good job, but it's just the data is not out there. So I think that's really like a data issue. So, we're trying to like make these business cases based on numbers that we're picking together from different places, which is fine. But, it's kind of like, if we had the advantage of, being in the male health space, like I always like to say, PCOS affects 1 in 10 women, while erectile dysfunction, that's 1 in 10 men. And like how much funding into research and et cetera, like, Viagra, et cetera, do we have there? So it's just like, women's health is underfunded, it's under-researched, and it makes it difficult for us to pull these numbers together. Personally, also on this issue of like, the male-female VCs, like I hear that a lot from femtech companies in our network that they're like, look, yeah, I will always look with a female partner in that fund and then reach out to them because they will understand. And like, I absolutely sympathize with that, and I can totally understand it. But on the other hand, I'm also like, well, I'm pitching any male investor I can find because, we're going to make that business case and we're going to show that impact and we're going to show that those are great opportunities that can do immense good for a lot of women around the world, but also, really, really make a lot of money. Like, you know, there's so many blue ocean opportunities in this space. And I think Maud in the beginning talked a little bit about these different like subspaces in the femtech, in the femtech space. And, you know, so many of them are complete blue oceans, like unexplored. I mean, I'm a PCOS company, like there's hardly anything out there, and it's 1 in 10 women. So, you know, I think it's kind of, the real challenge is the educational bit. I don't think that's necessarily just also, I mean, obviously I'd love investors to be more aware of this and like even learn more, but I think, you know, that the real problem starts somewhere else. And it's like really these years of neglecting women's health on any level, also research and in the public discourse.
Okay, thanks, Kathrin, for all this. Okay, so we'll follow up with the question regarding the ecosystem, the femtech ecosystem, which is developing in Europe. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the question tab. I see that there are some in the comments, but it's hard to see them if they are not in the question tab. So please do so. So I was saying we'll continue with the femtech ecosystem. So focusing on in Europe especially, but what is your vision on this ecosystem in Europe so far? How it has evolved the past years, and also what's really what's the value for the entrepreneurs and all the actors in this ecosystem? What should they get out from that? So that's a lot of questions. I agree. So who wants to start with this question about the ecosystem?
I mean, I can talk a little bit about sort of how I've seen the space evolve, and I think like generally in terms of the value, when I started to really develop an interest in the women's health innovation space, and the reason why I started Femtech Insider and sort of, you know, all the work that we do, it's really all this information was out there, but it was in all these different like, you know, places, and it was very, very difficult to get a holistic view of the space. And so I think, you know, with Femtech Insider, what we're really trying to do is to bring this together. And there's a lot of other amazing organizations that have sort of followed us that are, you know, also helping to sort of carry out that message and sort of, you know, addressing different bits and pieces of this ecosystem and just like really bringing people together. And I think it's just like really super helpful to kind of have this common voice in a sense, and sort of, you know, just having this femtech community allows aspiring entrepreneurs to just have a place to go. Like, you know, I have a lot of women reach out that are like, look, I'm so interested in this, I'd love to like, you know, start something. And, you know, what do I do? What can I, you know, how do I do this? I get a lot of questions also just from students from, you know, business schools, etc., that are like, how can I break into femtech? Which is like, you know, such a strange question, is this, but I totally get it. It's just like sort of what skill set do I have? So it's very, very exciting that there's so many talented people that are looking to wanting to start companies, wanting to fund this space, and also wanting to, you know, kind of help build these companies. So I think it's been very exciting to just see this space blossom and sort of see more activity overall on like all levels. And yeah, I think it's just really going to be onwards and upwards from here.
And what's your take on Marguerite?
Sorry, no, I would totally second that. I think in Europe, we've really seen that evolving a lot, and really year on year, the progress is just, it's huge. It's actually the kind of growth you would expect from a young startup. So it's good that the ecosystem is moving that fast. I think another thing is like, I wouldn't say that for everything, but I think for femtech specifically, the US are kind of like forward. I think they are less taboo. It's a bit easier to talk about those things, and there are maybe a bit more prominent voices in the ecosystem talking about it and bringing it at the center of the stage. So I think it's always very interesting to look there. And for instance, if you look at sexual wellness, or just like at some point I was looking into erotic audio stories for women specifically. We saw that DeepSea, a US company, raised some funding, and then shortly after, it actually inspired a lot of European entrepreneurs. And now you've got Femtasy, you've got Mjoy, you've got Cheeks. So I think there it's always actually quite good to also look at the US and maybe get a few learnings from them as to how we can make the ecosystem even more responsive to the opportunities and the challenges of the femtech space.
Yes, on that note, so since you are comparing the US to Europe, what do you feel is missing in the European ecosystem for now? What should we look at from the US? So you're talking about specific business opportunities, but are there other things that that we should develop in the ecosystem to help entrepreneurs develop FemTech companies in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes in different. I think it doesn't have to be femtech specific. I think it's heavily linked to the diversity topic and gender equal, like more gender balance in the ecosystem, in the tech ecosystem. I really trust it goes hand in hand. And if you look at diversity initiatives in the US, you have All Race, which is an organization with that was founded by 34 women, and it got so much attention. They did so many different initiatives, not just from funds, but they were really they were really representing the different stakeholders in the ecosystem. So you had actual founders, former founders, LPs, funds, so really different kind of people getting involved. And they were the first ones to launch the initiatives like Women Office Hours, offline events, gathering hundreds of people, summit where they would have key speakers, both men and women, to then attract a larger audience. And they actually were so successful that they ended up raising a funding round to move faster. So I think that's an interesting one. Then we also looked at the US, for instance. Now we have included in our term sheet a diversity and inclusion clause, because it is important for us that our portfolio companies also take that subject very seriously. And so now it is part of our terms to kind of like make sure we're aligned with that and make sure that the founders and companies we invest in are helping improve the standards in Europe. So I think the US were definitely very helpful for how an investor kind of should behave when it comes to diversity. And again, I know it's not directly linked to FemTech, but I think there's an indirect link, because then it also empowers women to become female founders and tackle topics that they might have not tackled otherwise.
Definitely. And Kathrin, do you have some inputs about this?
Yeah, so I think one thing, and that's also maybe not necessarily only FemTech specific, but also digital health specific. I think the US has a very, very different approach to healthcare. And, I mean, in the US, I think people are just much more comfortable or like used to having to pay for their healthcare, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing, but it's just sort of, how their healthcare system works. So, it's a little bit easier to just, go in there, build a direct-to-consumer company in the health space and just, see what sticks in a sense. I think in Europe, we're a little bit more conservative almost, and very concerned with access and, sort of in terms of the quality that we want to bring to the table from the very, very start is very, very high. So, I am so excited about the digital health and specifically FemTech companies that I'm seeing coming out of Europe that are really, really, maybe take a little bit longer to like sort of launch and, really get everything right, reach out to these key opinion leaders and research centers and, talk to a lot of providers, do a lot of patient discovery, really make sure that the solutions that they're putting out to the market are evidence-based, are actually make a difference, have data to back up the efficiency or efficacy of these treatment pathways. And then also, kind of already have that thought in mind, well, maybe I have to start direct to consumer, but like the path I really want to go on is to become a digital therapeutic and be reimbursed. So, I think for us in Europe, I feel sometimes it takes us a little bit longer to sort of get to market, but then, when we are, the quality is top notch. But I mean, that's sort of just also my observation from watching the FemTech space for a long time. And like, obviously, we also have to be a little bit conscious because generally rounds tend to be a little bit smaller in Europe than in the US. And also I feel like, in terms of, and as you said, we're really doing very, very new things that it's not like, there's 3 startups and I'm making a little bit of a twist and, launching something and building something. So, a lot of the things that we're doing are really, really super innovative and like have never been done before. So there's always a little bit reluctance of like, convincing people, oh yeah, virtual clinics are a thing, and this can actually work, and this can actually make a difference, and we can really move the needle for patients in these spaces. So I think like it's also maybe not necessarily a femtech topic, but I'm the last person that always wants to be like, oh, it's on the VC soda. But I feel like sometimes, talking to US investors, we don't necessarily need to do as much explaining also about like why we believe these digital health solutions are needed. In Europe, I think it's like kind of a little bit newer, and there's not as much of a tradition of investing in these kinds of companies yet. But yeah, I mean,
100%.
Go ahead.
100%. And just on that, I think generally speaking, US investors are also more inclined to be listening to more moonshot bets. And I think typically European investor might look at digital health, like when it's quite specific, they might look at it as a moonshot bet for the kind of bet that they do in their investments. Just FYI, a moonshot bet would be kind of like more risky investment than what you typically do, and where it would go either to zero very quickly, or it would just like completely blow up in a good way, like take over the market. So I would bet that if you're a company doing something in the egg freezing space, I bet you will have more response from US funds than from European funds. But we do need European funds to be more active there, because also, like for instance, egg freezing, you would have a lot of regulatory challenges as well, looking how this can be reimbursed, etc., etc. And that is quite European, like Europe specific. So we do need to catch up there.
About this, there's a question from Emric, so I'm taking the question now since it's related. Do you see any forthcoming changes to reimbursement policies, regulatory regimes for women's contraceptive and other sexual health? Are any private insurer innovating to provide such reimbursement regardless of regulatory regimes? So I don't know if you want to answer this. If it's a bit specific.
So I could try.
Yeah.
So I didn't quite see the question, but like we do see private insurers, developing a vast interest in this. So I actually talk to quite a few insurers every once in a while that are like, look, this women's health and femtech space is very, very interesting to us. And, insurers have an interest in, like as many insured people as possible staying healthy so that their costs stay down. So it's like a definite economic interest. In terms of regulatory, I think, those things need to I'm a huge fan of healthcare being regulated, because it's so important. Like I used to work in software as a services and sort of productivity software for a while, and if we launched something and a tool and like there was a bug in it, it was like, okay, let's go and fix it, we'll put it in the next sprint, it's going to be okay. But like with healthcare, you really want to get it right like all the time. And so I think like these things need to be regulated, like and I think like in order to be considered for reimbursement sort of through DIGA, et cetera, in Germany, or the NHS by the healthcare systems, or also be sort of accepted or sort of sold through the private insurers. You need that evidence, and you need to make sure that your solution is following everything it needs to follow, in a sense.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not sure that answers the question, but
yeah, well, Enrique, you tell us if that answers your question fully. Another question related to the US that I'm taking now. Why do you think US has less taboo? So Marguerite, you were talking about this a bit earlier. And how could we make the subject less taboo in Europe? If there is an answer.
Yeah, I think it's just more in the culture of the US, generally speaking. And I think even if you look at the tech history, it did start in the Silicon Valley. And that's where and burgeoning and blossoming, and then it reached you. I think we came after and we got inspired by the US, and I think generally speaking the US are much more inclined to put themselves on stage, and people talk about those things just in a more, in a very liberal way. And I do second Kathrin's point that I think Europe is just more conservative at heart, and how we can change that, I think it's really by involving all the different stakeholders. I don't think that if founders operate in silo or communicate in silo, if funds operate in silo, then I think nothing can be reached. And it's really making sure that all the different components of the ecosystem are represented and taking part in the debate, that we will be able to move forward. And that's why I think like initiatives like Sista are really good. And even like, I think panels, I don't always find them very effective, to be honest. But I think that setup, for instance, where you have one investor, one founder, and one organization, I think that's great, because then you really get to see the different angles, the different vision, and that's by confronting that you can make it a constructive debate, and that you can move forward and understand what needs to be, like, what need to be answered from whom. So, for instance, I would hope that here in that conversation, you can get really good tips from Kathrin on what it means to build a successful femtech company, but also hopefully a few tips understanding, okay, what are investors' expectations, just to make sure that I don't develop something that's going to be completely off or irrelevant to the people I will need to get money from. So yeah, I would think getting everyone involved, and obviously communication is crucial, but I think similarly to the climate debate that we're having, I think we are beyond the point of greenwashing or of doing like PR initiatives that are not followed by actions. I think it really needs to be consistent and to be in the medium to long term, not just like short-term communication that will die off shortly.
Okay, thanks. So let's go to the last type of question we had from the audience related to the trends of this ecosystem. So with your vision of this ecosystem, what are the most untapped opportunities in FemTech in terms of segment or type of companies? What are your takes on that? Kathrin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I like to take a pretty broad sort of approach to defining women's health. So, like when we talk about women's health, I don't necessarily only look at the conditions that only affect women, but I'm also very interested in the spaces where women are differently or predominantly affected by certain like health conditions, like, I don't know, Alzheimer's or different kinds of cancer, cardiac diseases. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there that a lot of sort of more general digital health solutions are maybe missing, of like, sort of really building for these women. I think we're a little bit on the non-women specific digital health solutions, sometimes following the trend that we've seen in research that, we don't see women included in these test cohorts because, it's so complicated because we have periods and we have cycles. So, it's, so I think seeing a few of these problems kind of replicate in the digital health space, I would hope, or I would expect that there's more companies that are addressing these issues. What I'm personally, my bet this year is it's going to be the year of endometriosis, egg freezing, and overall gynecological health beyond fertility and menstrual health. So I think we're going to see a lot of funding there. I mean, like sexual wellness is seeing a lot of activity right now in terms of investment. So there's a lot happening there. But I think, yeah, tons of untapped opportunities. Also B2C cancer, I think, is going to be interesting.
And Marguerite?
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, I still think the market is nascent enough for us to find basically all FemTech approaches very relevant. I think it's interesting when we look at companies also in anything related to fertility. I mean, maybe it's because of my age group as well, where I'm 29, but I'm also like, I think it's incredible how uneducated we are about how fertile we are. And I have so many friends that are trying to have a kid, and it takes some time. And in France, it's completely nuts. You have to have been trying for a year before being able to run tests to understand if there's a problem or not. And even if you see that maybe there's a problem, you still have a battery of tests to do to just check out what could be the case, but not necessarily to understand what it is. So I think there it's still incredibly archaic. And I could imagine there is a lot to be done, even from a purely informative way on, are there small things that you can do to increase your chances of being pregnant, or I don't know, just like making you more aware of your cycles, not just from a period perspective, but really when you're trying to conceive. And then I think also we're having more and more questions around egg freezing because women want to have kids later. So I think everything that's kind of like conceiving, around the conceiving topic is really, really interesting and very black at the moment. Like, I think there is very little information around that. And yeah, generally speaking, we could also see models like the Maven model in the US, where it's a clinic dedicated to women. I mean, generally speaking, I still think the market is so nascent that all sectors and subsectors would be really interesting enough to look into.
Related to those new opportunities, there is a question from Amandine asking, are there intersectional FemTech initiatives yet with specific medical needs for Black women, Asian women, Hispanic women, etc.? Except for cosmetic startups, do you think it will be the next step for FemTech startups?
Yeah, I absolutely.
So I mean, I can. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
For it.
Yeah, I mean, we've just actually this week seen.
No, I mean, just very briefly.
Sorry. Okay, Kathrin, you go.
So we've just actually this week seen two, I think, Series A's in this space for Folks Health and Plume Health in the US. So they're both targeting LGBTQIA+ communities, and we're also seeing more and more culturally aware care. So again, there's in the US a bunch of projects. So there's Health in Her Who, there's May, maternal health, a huge topic also sort of specifically. I mean, we know sort of the problems with Black women having children in the US, and that there's, they just have much higher risks of maternal death, which is horrible. And so, yeah, I think there are those initiatives, but I absolutely agree that we need to see more in this space. It's not enough. And like, I'm absolutely with what Marguerite said, that it's such a nascent space. And I hope to see many, many, many more companies that are really, addressing all these different women. Like, again, my co-founder and I, we're both Central European white women. So, it's super important when you put together patient advisory boards for your startup, et cetera, that, you see your own bias and you recognize sort of where you have your blind spots and sort of make sure that you get the advice of people from these different backgrounds in to really understand how to build for them. Because, like, again, lived experience is so important. And I'm, again, absolutely with Marguerite that it's important to have women involved in founding these companies, just because the lived experience is so important when building these solutions. But again, even as a woman, I have blind spots because I've grown up in a certain way, and I've grown up in a certain healthcare system. So yeah, there are companies, and I can't wait to see more of them.
Great. We'll take one last question because time is running. So there was a question from Aida asking, do you think that the growth of the FemTech market would push the research into feminine disease conditions affecting women differently? Or does the push for research need to come from elsewhere? So maybe Marguerite, you want to do, if you have a take on that? Do you want to start since Kathrin started before?
No, I mean, I think it definitely, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, there's a little delay, but it's okay.
Sorry about that. Connection is going a bit buggy at the moment. No, I mean, I think it goes hand in hand. I think, as I was saying a bit earlier, I think if you have the different stakeholders in the ecosystem that are getting engaged, then I think it would naturally just push the research further because, I mean, being a founder also sometimes mean going into the research bit, and if a founder identifies an opportunity and is hustling it through and realizes that there needs to be more research, I think that's also how you raise awareness about it and have maybe the scientific people involved. So I think we're also at like technologies at the cross-border with all those different sectors and spheres. And that if a woman who wants to become a founder identifies a problem and sees that there is not enough research, then I think this is also how you trigger more research. So I would answer yes.
Okay, Thanks, Marguerite and Kathrin. So we'll finish the session here. Thank you so much for the time you took to share all your expertise with us. For the audience, one more thing. If you want to keep in touch, you can join a Sister FemTech group on LinkedIn. I put the link in the chat. So you just have one click to do to get the news for the next events, and then we'll talk soon for what's coming up. Thank you again, Marguerite and Kathrin, and have a nice evening. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for having me.